we protect our own. The words hit heavy as 200 leather-clad bikers filled every corner of Emily's struggling diner. 24 hours earlier, she had stood up for a lone Hell's Angel when local cops harassed him. What happened next would leave an entire town in tears. Emily Parker's hands were chapped and red as she wiped down the sticky counter at Parker's diner for the third time that hour. The lunch rush, if you could call 8 customers a rush, had ended, and she was mentally calculating if today's take would cover the electric bill that sat unopened in her purse. The final notice stamp had bled through the envelope. "Just a few more months," she muttered, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. It was the same empty promise she'd been making herself for 18 months now. Ever since her father's massive stroke had put him in a care facility and her in charge of the family diner. Her nursing career in the city, her apartment, her life, all put on hold for a small-town greasy spoon that was bleeding money faster than she could bandage the wounds. The ancient ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, barely moving the humid summer air. Outside, Brookfield's main street was quiet, as it always was these days since the factory had cut the third shift. The bank had foreclosed on 3 businesses already this year. Some days, Emily wondered if Parker's diner would be next. The bell above the door jingled, that cheerful little sound her father had always loved, and Emily glanced up. Her stomach tightened instantly. A mountain of a man dressed in worn leather pushed through the doorway. His weathered face was half hidden behind a wild gray beard that looked like it had seen dust from 1,000 highways. Faded tattoos crawled up his thick forearms like illustrated stories of a hard life disappearing beneath rolled-up sleeves. But it was the patch on his vest that made the room go still. The unmistakable death's head insignia of the Hells Angels. The handful of remaining customers froze. Old Mrs. Whitmore actually clutched her pearls. The Dawson brothers stopped mid-bite, forks hovering in the air. Even the radio seemed to hit a moment of static. The biker seemed to feel the tension, his massive shoulders hunching slightly as he made his way to the counter. Each heavy bootfall echoed against the worn linoleum like a hammer strike. He deliberately chose the stool at the far end, keeping distance between himself and the other patrons, a man used to being unwelcome. Emily could practically hear her father's voice in her head. Everyone's money spends the same at Parker's. But her father had never had to serve a Hell's Angel in their small, conservative town, where rumors about the motorcycle club circulated like gospel. Emily steadied her hand, grabbed a cloudy plastic menu and a glass of ice water. The other waitress, Rachel, had suddenly found a pressing need to refill ketchup bottles at the far end of the diner. "Thanks for coming into Parker's," Emily said, approaching him with the same practiced smile she offered every customer. "Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Made it fresh this morning." The biker looked up, and Emily was struck by his eyes, pale blue and bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. Against that hard face, those leather-creased features, his eyes seemed to belong to another man entirely. "Coffee," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, almost soft. "Black as you can make it, and whatever's fastest from the kitchen. Been on the road since before sunup." As Emily poured his coffee from the ancient percolator, she noticed his hands, huge, callous things that seemed built for violence, but there was a slight tremble to them as he reached for the mug. His knuckles were scraped raw, and a thin hospital bracelet was partially hidden beneath his leather cuff. Behind the exhaustion in his eyes, Emily recognized something else, A bone-deep sadness she'd seen too many times during her nursing rotations in the oncology ward. It was the look of someone keeping vigil. "Long ride ahead of you still?" she asked, keeping her voice casual, the way her father had always chatted with strangers. His massive hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was something precious, drawing warmth from the chipped ceramic. He took a long pull before answering. "Heading back to Riverbend Hospital," he said finally, each word deliberate, like speaking was an effort. "My daughter." Something seemed to catch in his throat. He stared down at his coffee, his knuckles whitening around the mug. "My daughter," he repeated, but couldn't seem to finish the thought. Emily felt something shift inside her. Not pity. This man wouldn't want pity, but a familiar ache of recognition. Not a Hell's Angel in that moment, just a worried father. "I'll get that order in right away," she said, her voice softening. "Toast and eggs work?" "Fastest thing on the menu. 6 minutes tops." He nodded, the relief evident as his shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe it was the promise of food, or maybe just that she hadn't asked him to explain further. As Emily turned to place the order, she felt the stares from the remaining customers. Mrs. Whitmore was whispering urgently to Mrs. Green, their gray heads bent together like conspirators. The Dawson brothers were openly glaring. Rachel was still finding those ketchup bottles absolutely fascinating. Small towns had long memories, and the Hells Angels had a reputation that preceded them. 20 years ago, a group of bikers had roared through Brookfield, leaving broken windows at Marshall's grocery after an argument. Never mind that no one knew if they'd been Angels or some other club. In Brookfield's collective memory, all bikers were guilty by association. The bell jingled again, and two of Brookfield's police officers walked in. Officer Daniels and Officer Brooks. They were regulars, usually friendly enough, though Emily had always found Daniels' swagger a bit much. They spotted the biker immediately, and Emily saw Daniels nudge Brooks. They approached the counter, deliberately taking seats on either side of the man. "Well, well. Don't often see your kind in Brookfield," Daniels said loudly, making no attempt to hide his hostility. "Just passing through, I hope." The biker kept his eyes on his coffee. "Just getting some food, officer." Emily returned with a plate of eggs and toast, placing it in front of the biker. "Anything else I can get you?" Before he could answer, Officer Daniels spoke up. "How about checking this guy's ID, Emily? Make sure he's not one of those angels we've got bulletins about." The biker reached slowly into his pocket, but Daniels' hand moved to his holster. "Careful now." Emily felt her temper rising. "He's a paying customer, Daniels. Just like you." "Not just like me," Daniels smirked. "His kind bring trouble. Drugs. Violence." "My kind?" The biker looked up for the first time, his voice still quiet but with an edge. "You don't know the first thing about me, officer." Daniels leaned in closer. "I know that patch. I know what it means." The biker started to respond, but Brooks cut him off. "Maybe we should run your plates. See what comes up." Several other customers were watching now, some nodding in agreement with the officers, others looking uncomfortable. The biker put his fork down. "Look, I'm just trying to get some food before I visit my daughter at Riverbend. She's—" His voice caught slightly. "She's not doing well." "Oh, I'm sure." Daniels laughed. "The old sick family member. Classic." Something in Emily snapped. Maybe it was the memory of her father in his hospital bed, or maybe it was just the basic human decency her parents had taught her. Either way, she'd had enough. "That's it," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You're done harassing my customers, Daniels." The diner went silent. No one spoke to Officer Daniels that way, especially not about how he handled suspicious individuals. "Excuse me?" Daniels turned his attention to Emily, eyes narrowing. "You heard me. He came in for a meal. He's been nothing but polite, and you're treating him like a criminal." "You don't know who you're defending, Emily," Brooks warned. "I'm defending a customer in my diner, and unless you have an actual reason to suspect him of something besides his clothing, I'd appreciate it if you let him eat in peace." Daniel stood up, towering over Emily. "Your dad would be real disappointed to see you taking sides against the law. That was a low blow, and everyone knew it." Frank Parker had been friends with half the police force before his stroke. "My dad taught me to judge people by how they act, not what they wear," Emily replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And right now, you're the one acting badly in my diner." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Several customers shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Green, the retired librarian, suddenly became very interested in her pie. Brian Dawson, who'd gone to high school with Emily, stared down at his coffee cup. "I think I'll take my food to go," the biker said quietly, reaching for his wallet. "No," Emily said firmly. "Your money's no good here today. The meal's on me." The biker looked at her with surprise, genuine gratitude flashing across his face. Daniels's face flushed deep red. "You're making a mistake, Emily. This town has a way of remembering who its friends are." The threat wasn't subtle. In a small town like Brookfield, being on the wrong side of the police could be bad for business. Emily's hands were trembling now, but she kept her chin up. "Are you going to order something, or are you just here to intimidate my customers?" For a moment, she thought Daniels might do something truly stupid. Instead, he threw a few dollars on the counter. "Lost my appetite." "Let's go, Brooks." As they left, the bell jingling angrily behind them, conversation slowly resumed throughout the diner. Emily turned to the biker, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry about that," she said. He shook his head slowly. "Don't be. Not many people would have done what you just did." He paused, studying her face. "Name's Jason. Jason Mercer. Emily Parker." "Thank you, Emily Parker." He ate quickly after that, and when he finished, he left a $20 bill on the counter despite her protests. "For your dad," he said simply before heading out the door. Emily tried to put the incident behind her, but the stares from the other customers told her it wouldn't be that simple. By closing time, she'd overheard enough whispered conversations to know the story was spreading through town like wildfire. That night, as she sat by her father's bedside at the Brookfield Care Center, she told him about her day. "I don't know if I did the right thing, Dad," she said, even though his stroke had left him unable to respond. "But I couldn't just stand by." Her father's eyes seemed to hold approval, but maybe that was just what she wanted to see. The next morning, Emily arrived at the diner early as usual. What wasn't usual was the closed until further notice sign someone had taped to her window overnight. Beneath it, scrawled in red marker, "No biker lovers in Brookfield." Emily ripped the sign down, her hands shaking with anger. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but the message was clear enough. The breakfast rush was noticeably lighter than normal. By lunchtime, it was obvious that word had spread. The diner that usually buzzed with conversation and clinking silverware was eerily quiet, with only a handful of regulars, braving the apparent boycott. Old Mrs. Green came in for her usual tuna sandwich, patting Emily's hand sympathetically. "This will blow over, dear. Small towns have short memories when they want to." Brian Dawson and his wife came by too, deliberately sitting at the window table where they could be seen from the street. "To hell with them," Brian said louder than necessary. "Best coffee in town is still the best coffee in town." But these small gestures of support weren't enough. Emily did the math in her head. Another week like this, and she wouldn't make rent. Around 2 o'clock, with the diner empty, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of despair. She leaned against the counter, fighting back tears. The diner wasn't just a business, it was her father's legacy, the place where she'd grown up, learning to count change and wipe tables. Now it might all disappear because she'd stood up for a stranger. The familiar jingle of the bell interrupted her thoughts. Emily quickly wiped her eyes, putting on her professional smile. A man in his 50s stood in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a plain blue t-shirt. The only hint of his affiliation was a small Hells Angels pin on his leather jacket. Behind him was a woman about the same age, her long gray hair pulled back in a neat braid. "Emily Parker?" the man asked. Emily nodded, suddenly nervous. "I'm Thomas Mercer, Jason's brother." He stepped forward, extending his hand. "This is my wife, Sandra." Emily shook their hands, confusion evident on her face. "Jason told us what you did for him yesterday," Sandra explained. "He would have come himself, but he's still at the hospital with Chloe. That's his daughter." "How is she?" Emily asked. "Touch and go," Thomas replied, his face grim. "Cancer, stage 4. They're trying an experimental treatment at Riverbend. Last chance kind of thing." Emily's heart sank. "I'm so sorry." "Jason said you were kind to him when not many would be," Sandra continued. "Said you stood up to those cops like you'd been doing it all your life." Emily shrugged, embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same. Thomas shook his head. "No, they wouldn't. And from the looks of this place, you're paying for it now." Emily couldn't deny it. The empty tables spoke for themselves. "We wanted to thank you properly," Sandra said, reaching into her purse. "Jason said you mentioned your father was ill." "I don't need money," Emily said quickly, her pride flaring. Thomas held up his hands. "Wouldn't dream of offering. But we thought maybe we could send some business your way." Before Emily could ask what he meant, the rumble of motorcycle engines filled the air. Not just one or two, but dozens, growing louder by the second. Emily moved to the window, her eyes widening as motorcycle after motorcycle appeared on the street outside her diner. They came from both directions, filling the street, then the parking lot, then spilling over into the vacant lot next door. There had to be at least 100, no, 200 bikers, men and women of all ages, most wearing Hells Angels colors or supportive patches. They dismounted in waves, removing helmets, stretching after what must have been a long ride. "What? What is this?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible above the rumble of idling engines. Thomas smiled. "Jason reached out to some of the local chapters last night, told them about a diner owner who showed him respect when he needed it most. Word travels fast in our community." "There must be over 200 people out there," Emily whispered. 217 by my last count," Sandra corrected with a smile. "And they've all been riding since dawn. I imagine they're pretty hungry." As if on cue, the bell jingled and the first group of bikers entered. They were polite, almost deferential, greeting Emily with respect before taking seats. Then more came in, filling every table, lining up at the counter, standing patiently when there was nowhere left to sit. Emily stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. A large man with a full white beard approached her. "You must be Emily. I'm Marcus, president of the Riverbend chapter. Jason's one of ours." He extended a massive hand, which Emily shook automatically. "Hope you don't mind us dropping in like this." I don't think I have enough food," Emily admitted. Marcus laughed. "Already taken care of. Sandra called ahead to your suppliers. Got a big delivery coming in 20 minutes. Don't worry about the cost. It's covered." Emily looked around in disbelief as her diner, which had been a ghost town moments before, now buzzed with life. The bikers were ordering coffee, water, whatever she had ready. All paying in cash, all leaving generous tips. "I don't understand," she said to Marcus. "You did all this for me?" "Because of what happened with Jason?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "People see our patches and think they know who we are. Most times, they treat us like we're not even human. Jason was on his way to maybe say goodbye to his daughter, and those cops were giving him grief just because of what he was wearing." He paused, looking around the diner. "What you did, standing up for one of our brothers when it wasn't the easy thing to do, that means something to us." Outside, the rumble of motorcycles continued as more riders arrived. Across the street, Emily could see people gathering on the sidewalk, watching in amazement. She even spotted Officer Brooks among them, radio in hand, looking utterly bewildered. The bell, above the door, jingled again, and Emily turned to see a familiar face. Jason Mercer stood in the doorway, looking tired, but somehow lighter than he had the day before. "Hope you don't mind me bringing a few friends," he said with the ghost of a smile. Emily laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "I think I can squeeze them in." For the next few hours, Emily and the 2 teenage waitresses she managed to call in worked harder than they ever had. The food delivery arrived as promised. Boxes of fresh produce, meat, bread, and everything else they needed. It was enough to feed an army of hungry bikers. Every table was full. Customers rotated out as new arrivals stepped in. The register filled and had to be emptied twice. The bikers were courteous, appreciative, and every one of them paid in cash and tipped generously. Word spread through town, and slowly, cautiously, some of the regular customers began to reappear. They stood awkwardly at first, clearly intimidated by the sea of leather and tattoos, but the bikers made room, shared tables, and struck up conversations. Mrs. Green ended up deep in conversation with a biker grandmother about their shared love of quilting. Brian Dawson discovered one of the riders was also a Vietnam veteran. Even the high school principal found himself in a debate about education reform with a biker who turned out to be a part-time community college professor. By sunset, the impromptu gathering had transformed into something like a street festival. Someone rolled out a portable grill to help with the overflow cooking. Music played from motorcycle stereos. Children from the neighborhood cautiously approached, fascinated by the gleaming bikes. Laughter and conversation filled the air. In the middle of it all, Emily found a moment to pull Jason aside. "How's your daughter?" "Chloe, right?" Jason's face brightened for the first time. "That's actually why I could make it today. Doctor called this morning. The treatment, it's working. Early days, but her numbers are better." His voice caught. "First good news we've had in months." Emily hugged him, and after a beat of surprise, he hugged her back. "She wants to meet you," Jason said when they pulled apart. the woman who stood up for her old man. I told her you reminded me of her. Tough. Doesn't take any nonsense. I'd like that, Emily said, meaning it. As the evening wound down, Marcus called for everyone's attention. Conversations paused. Forks stopped midair. I want to thank Emily Parker for her hospitality today, he announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the diner. And I want to make something clear to everyone in Brookfield. He paused, looking around. Parker's Diner is under the protection of the Hells Angels from this day forward. A cheer erupted from the bikers. Marcus continued, We'll be making this a regular stop on our rides, and we'd take it as a personal insult if anyone in this town gave Miss Parker any trouble about who she chooses to serve in her establishment. He locked eyes with Officer Brooks, who had finally ventured inside and now sat uncomfortably in a corner booth. Brooks looked down at his hands. Are we clear? Marcus asked. Brooks nodded quickly. Yes. Good, Marcus said, his expression warming. Now who's ready for pie? I hear Emily's apple pie is the best in 3 counties. Another round of cheers, and conversation resumed. Laughter and the smell of warm pastry filled the air. Later that night, after the last of the bikers had departed with promises to return soon, Emily locked up the diner and sat down to count the receipts. It was more money than she'd made in the past 2 weeks combined. But more than that, something had changed. Not just in her diner, but in the town itself. She could feel it in the air as she walked to her car. The town that had been ready to shut her out that very morning had seen something new that day. Behind the leather vests and loud engines, they'd glimpsed the humanity of people they'd been taught to fear. As Emily drove to the care center to visit her father, she smiled at the irony. By standing up for one stranger, she'd gained hundreds of friends. And maybe, just maybe, helped a small town remember what it means to judge people by how they act, not by how they look. The next morning, Emily arrived at the diner to find a package leaning against the door. Inside was a leather vest, custom made, with Parker's Diner emblazoned across the back and surrounded by the words, Friends of the Angels. Pinned to it was a note, written in rough handwriting. For the bravest diner owner we know, Chloe's doing better. She still wants to meet you. Jason Emily hung the vest behind the counter, right next to her father's old apron. When Officer Daniels came in for coffee an hour later, unusually subdued and polite, Emily served him with the same smile she gave every customer. After all, her father had always taught her to judge people by how they act, not what they wear. And sometimes, it takes a diner full of bikers to remind a town what that really means. It's a strange thing, how the smallest moments can change our lives. Emily Parker didn't set out to be a hero that day. She just couldn't stand by while someone was being mistreated. She didn't know that her simple act of decency would bring 200 bikers to her door, save her father's legacy, and help heal the divisions in a wounded town. Sometimes, courage isn't about grand gestures or dramatic stands. Sometimes, it's just about serving coffee to a stranger when everyone else turns away, and changing the world one cup at a time.